Hello, friends, and welcome to Impact Everywhere, the podcast that looks for people having a positive impact in unexpected places. My name is Benjamin Von Wong, and I am your host today with Mr. Bill Bensley. Bill is a legendary luxury architect, and he's designed some of the world's most iconic hotels, resorts, spas, homes, and sometimes even palaces. Now, speaking of palaces, I had the wonderful opportunity of working with Bill on one of the palaces that he designed for a sultan in Malaysia, and he invited me to make a film showcasing what it was like to discover the palace through the eyes of a boy. Well, I am glad to tell you that Bill is actually one of the leading designers and architects that tries to overlap sustainability and luxury into each and every one of the projects that he creates. So over the next 45 minutes or so, we will not only get Bill to describe a couple of his fantastic properties, we're also going to talk about how he tries to act as a patron to the local communities, the local landscape, the local wildlife, and how he uses his skills to make a difference. This is Bill Bensley talking about one of the phenomenal properties that he's built and that he owns called Shinta Mani Wild, all the way in Cambodia. And I've just asked him to describe what it is like to arrive on the property just to get us all started.
8 years ago, we went to an auction of this southern part of the Cardamom National Forest. And this piece of land, this piece of forest was up for titanium. Because there's a lot of titanium on the site, but it's also part of the Tmor Rung River. There's this river that runs through the property. And this property that we bought is about the size of Central Park, a little bit bigger, a huge piece of property. And this river runs through it, and there's these 3 waterfalls. So it's a beautiful piece of property and quite densely forested. When you come from Phnom Penh, it's quite a long drive. You get to the southern part of the forest and you change into because it was just a tiny little track, you change into a 1968 U.S. Army vehicle. It's a Jeep. And we've got about 4 of these Jeeps that we picked up secondhand recycled, and we put in some new engines and so forth. So they run pretty well. But you rumble along this very narrow track into about midway into the property. And then I would take you to a giant wooden tower with no walls and just the stair that winds up the middle. But you have to climb up about 12 stories or more. It's 104 steps, something like that. And then from there, you can see all of the property. You can see all the way to the north, south, east, west. You can see where you are finally because you've come from this rainforest, which is very dense. And then you climb way up above the forest and you are given a brief on how to zip line. And it's a zip line right across that river that I just described, and more importantly, right across the waterfall. The waterfall is about 400 meters away, so that makes this zip line the longest zip line in all of Southeast Asia. And after a safety briefing, you get clipped into this. You're given a gin and tonic, if you like, just to calm your nerves, and off you go. And you arrive at the other side of the river. And there's someone there to catch you, and then you're taken to another series of very fun bridges, like rope bridges, which are clipped in all the time, so you're not going to fall. There's no danger to it, but what it does, it pushes everybody to the edge of their comfort zone. And if you push a guest to the edge of their comfort zone, they will remember this for the rest of their life. They've got bragging rights. So you're walking down the far side of the river, the west side of the river, and then you see another very short one, and you're inside of the National Geographic, that yellow box at the front of the magazine. We did a big one. It's a Kodak moment. You zip line through that, right through the mist, over the weir of this waterfall. There's 1 meter of water that's falling, so it's a huge waterfall. You zip into the landing zone, and then you're given your drink of choice. And then from then on, it's just bliss. And every time I go there, Ben, I do this at least 4 or 5 times. And when you come, we're going to do it 6 times. Deal?
Deal. Of course, you would have to be playing on the zip line. I'm sure you created that just for yourself.
I did.
And then along the way, you're like inviting others to play with you.
Exactly. I created this whole damn place for myself.
That's great. I really love this idea of having an entire space where humans are almost the smallest part of the equation. But the most important part of Shinta Mani Wild, and the thing that I have always found really interesting about you, is that you didn't just create a hotel inside of this forest and take from it. You're also giving back in some really interesting ways. Can you talk a little bit about your relationship between you and the forest and how you are ensuring that this hotel is actually in service of the environment around it?
That actually, Ben, that's the only reason why we built this thing. We built this because I worked on the Four Seasons attendant camp in Chiang Rai, where we built a project there to be able to take 36 elephants off the streets of Bangkok and then to let them roam free in this big property up there. So I had experience. This was in about 15 years ago. I had experience in building tented camps. When we bought this thing, we really didn't know what we were going to do with it. But I said, let's do something like we did Four Seasons tented camp. Where we are in the southern Cardamom National Forest is next to a little tiny town called Tmor Rung, and there's probably maybe 1,000 people at the most living there. And since we opened 2 years ago now, we have about 150 employees, but 72%, 72% of the employees that we have are from this town. And this little village, before we came, existed primarily on farming, but also on pillaging from the forest and also hunting wildlife. And so now we have the majority of the major hunters on our side now as rangers, which is a good thing. It's certainly an African model, but that sort of thing doesn't happen very much in Southeast Asia. So it's a good turnaround. And in addition to this, then, besides the people that we hire, I also am in partnership with a company called Wildlife Alliance, which is a team of professional. It's a private army, basically. It's a private army in which to enforce Cambodian law against poachers and loggers. And it's a private army of about 120 people. And it's been organized for the last 20 years by an American woman named Sawana Gauntlet. And I've partnered with her because she and her army are the most effective to reinforce the laws of Cambodia of not poaching and not taking wildlife. Now, having said that, it's still, even still, this army that carries AK-47s, and they do every single day. It's with poachers and with our private army, it's like a game of cat and mouse. Every single day that our guys go out into the forest, they pick up 20, 30 different snares. And these snares are laid to catch anything and everything that you possibly can, including baby elephants. And they do catch baby elephants because there's still wild elephants out there. So the snares are very dangerous. And for example, over the last 7 years, just in our area, we picked up something like 800 chainsaws and seized them and brought them and destroyed them. And a chainsaw can cut down a huge amount of forest. And we're paying for this private army by way of a certain percentage, a large percentage of the money that we bring in by that $2,400. Right?
You are basically playing the role of the patron in many ways of this space and hiring locally, because ultimately, everyone needs to make a living. And these people who are poaching the forest and cutting down the forest, they're doing it for survival in order to, thrive as people, to feed their families and so forth. And I think what's interesting about the way that you've approached it is almost offering people and communities an alternative to not necessarily take from the environment and manage to make a living actually protecting the environment, which is really interesting. I'm curious to hear from you. What do you think is the responsibility of the luxury market in protecting either the environment or helping local communities? Because I think many people might feel that the reason the world has these problems, it's often blamed on the rich and this sort of polarization of wealth. And in some ways, it seems like you're trying to counteract that through your effort. So I'm wondering, how do you balance out this relationship between luxury and responsibility and so forth?
Let's go back just a little bit, Ben, is that if we were in a position in the South Cardamom National Forest, if we're in a position where people are starving or people are not making a living anymore and they have to do this, logging and taking the wild animals, I would take a hands-off approach. I would say, okay, sorry guys, get on with it. But you asked me about, is it the wealthy that, you didn't ask that directly, but is it the wealthy that are driving this? Yes, it is. It's the wealthy dining tables of Vietnam and China that are driving the demand for wildlife. They put incredible sums on the table to the people of Tmor Rung, my neighbors. They put incredible sums on the table. If you give me a civet, I'm going to give you $300 for a pound of civet cat. The average Cambodian makes $90 a month. And for those guys to go and catch a civet cat might take them 5 days. So there is, as David Attenborough says in his wonderful documentary I watched last night, what we're doing wrong is driven by the greed of people. And because the dining tables of Vietnam and China, they don't need to have civet cat. In fact, we know that the civet cats that we have on property have another type of COVID that is in their DNA. So eating wildlife is not a good thing for our future. So go back to your original question, Ben, about hospitality.
Yeah, I was just trying to understand what you believe the relationship between the luxury market and the communities should be like in order to close the gap between the haves and the have-nots. Because I think it's more of a philosophy than anything else. You're applying it to your industry, but I want to hear the philosophy behind it.
I'm not sure that there really is. I'm not a philosophical guy. I'm just trying to do what I think is right. That's all. That's it in a nutshell. I'm just trying to do what I think is right. And that for me to sit high on a pedestal and to tell everybody else that they should do one that's not the right thing to do either. So just try to do the right thing, man. That's all.
Beautiful. In your latest white paper that I just read through, you say that you try to build with purpose, operate locally, and create respectfully. And I think those are 3 really great pillars of design. When you sat down to write this white paper, what was the experience like? And what did you learn from the process of creating it?
Let me back up a bit. Every architect that works for a big hotel company is issued a building standards, a big giant book, building standards. And you have to follow this, Mr. Bensley, and otherwise you're not going to get on the job. It's a book that tells you what sort of fabrics that they want, what sort of distance that they want to have between chairs at a restaurant, what sort of specifications that the speaker should have in the ceilings, etc. And since I've been doing this, Ben, for 30-something years, is that I have a shit of books of these building standards. And I thought to myself one morning, how many of these books talk anything about sustainability? And I went back through them, and very few of them spoke anything about sustainability. And I was pissed off about a certain particular hotel that couldn't get rid of their zillion plastic bottles that you champion so much yourself, Ben, is that there was one particular hotel in Vietnam, and I was trying to get the owner to switch over to a bottling plant. And I went back and looked through bottling plants, see if we could get anything not to use plastic. There's nobody had that in their building standards. So then I said, what if I write a tiny little paper that has no name on it and send it to, which I did, send it to every single hotel company around the world? Would they or would they not put it inside of these building standards? Would they make that part of the information that they gave to the architects? And I got a great response, and many did, and I'm sure many did but haven't told me about it or rewrote it in their own way. My intention was this white paper was a small addition in which to fit in to the building standards of many hotel companies, just to give them a foot up, if you will, on sustainability, just to tell them, hey, these are the most important issues architect, owner, and hotelier. These are the most important issues that we need to look at today.
Got it. And as you were writing this white paper, as you were collecting kind of your decades of knowledge and these different solutions and hunting for new, more modern day solutions, what did you learn yourself as you were putting it together?
As you write anything, Ben, it crystallizes the ideas behind. And I started out with a 100-page paper. And I wanted to crystallize my ideas into 20 pages. What I realized that, and the feedback that I got, is that people don't want to know about sustainability if it costs them money, especially owners. If I can convince owners that sustainability will make them money, a new idea or an old idea, if it's going to save them money in the long term, they're going to buy it. So that was the key issue in everything that I did in that 20 pages, that white paper. It's all about how do we make money? And I think that is the way to the heart of most developers, because developers develop because they want to have a profit. When in Rome.
So as you put this white paper out into the world and different hoteliers like read it for the first time, what were some of the money-making ways to save the environment that resonated in an unexpected way for them? Were there any of the more popular ones?
Yeah, the whole initial idea where this thing started was that I wanted to put a bottling plant at the JW Marriott in Fuqua. They were going through something like 1 million plastic bottles. And that my friend, the general manager there, was complaining to me all the time. We put a bottling plant in there that cost something like $45,000 and that had a payback period of almost 2 years, a payback period of almost 2 years. Now, if I could build a hotel that had a payback period of 2 years, I would have a client list as long as my arm. So it all made sense to do it instead of buying huge amounts of pallets of plastic bottled water and so forth, that we're recycling our own glass bottles and so forth, and we don't need the storage. And then also after 2 years, we start then making that money back. And the penny dropped with my client, and it all happened. And now in my contracts for doing new hotels, I have a clause in there that says, we intend to do that for you. Do you agree with it? I've never had anyone since that push back with that.
Super interesting. So you basically just come up with a solution and say, hey, I got a better way to do it, guys. Are you down? And then they say, yes, of course.
Yeah.
I was going to ask about this. You're building a hotel is this like multi-stakeholder piece. So like what responsibility does the architect actually have in the way a hotel is run? In my mind, I thought the architect would just build the thing. And in your case, though, you're setting up all of these different standards and you're inviting these hoteliers and these architects to think about not just how something is built, but how something is run. And is that something that is normal?
Maybe not. Yeah, I don't know of another architect that gets involved in, the social fabric of where we're building or the environmental fabric of where we're building to the level that we do. And maybe that's a little bit strange. It's the right thing to do. Yeah.
I guess why I asked the question is like, what leverage do you have over a hotel chain? Like, how do you just walk up to a Four Seasons and say, this is how you should be running your hotel? You need to hire locally. You need to have a composting bin. What leverage do you have for them to listen to you?
Most of the time, or 99% of the time, is that a hotel company like Four Seasons is another consultant in a project. So I don't necessarily answer to, if I'm doing a Four Seasons, I don't necessarily answer to everything that Four Seasons wants to have, because the person that's paying for it, the developer, he's the boss. And he is the fellow that's hired me, while Four Seasons has to approve that. And by the way, I've done 14 different Four Seasons. There's not a company hotel company that doesn't necessarily want to hire me. So there's lists of architects that are approved. And so I'm on all those lists. But my point is, Ben, is that it's a group decision between the developer, the architect, and the hotelier company. So if I have a particular idea of involving social responsibility, involving the community in our project, or if I want to be something about conservation or about environmentalism, that's between me and the client more so than me and the hotel company. And at this point in my career, I have a lot of clients that come to me because of my position, my stance about social responsibility and environmentalism.
Thanks for painting the picture of how that multi-stakeholder relationship actually works. For people who are maybe less established than who would like to implement more responsible business practices in whatever field they happen to be in, do you have any advice then to, like, how does one actually convince the client to do the right thing when all they're focused on is the bottom line? How do you strike that balance, and how do you bring people along for the journey?
It's all about money. Yeah, unfortunately, it's all about money. So you look to examples of, I'm talking to the fresh architects, the architects who just get their first job. Look to examples about how environmentally successful projects and environmentally sustainable and sensitive projects are perhaps more commercially viable or commercially successful than others, and point to those and bring your client to understand what those are, what those projects are, and then join the wagon.
Interesting. In one of the episodes that I had with an advertising company, they were talking about how they don't try to convince their clients to do something one way or the other. They actually just try to come up with the best idea possible. And so it's not so much about convincing anyone because everyone's on the same team. It's about telling them that actually there's a far better way to do this. When I was reading through some of your more recent projects that you're working on, one of them that stood out to me is this human zoo project that you have planned in China. And when I read that, I didn't say, oh, this is a sustainability project. I saw that this was a really great story. So the story that you were deciding to tell is, say, let's just cage a bunch of humans inside of these hotel rooms and allow these endangered and exotic animals to roam free. What a great story. What a draw for people to come in. And not only were you going to do that, you're going to take animals from zoos and free them into this big park. And so there's a certain magic to the way that you think and weave things together where it is environmental, but it actually doesn't feel like a constraint. It feels like the secret sauce. Is that something that you do intentionally, or is that something that has just emerged as a result of your imagination and your intention and just living fully and honestly to who you are and what you want to do?
Is it intentional? I think, yeah, a spoonful of sugar makes the medicine go down. If you can make your intention, let me back up a bit. About 4 years ago, that the same client that you're speaking of came to me and said, Bill, we want to make a zoo. And I said to my client, I think zoos suck. But let me think about it for a while. Let's just figure this thing out. And then I started to think, I own this Shinta Mani Wild, and the Chinese are a big buyer a big consumer of the wild animals of the National Forest of Cambodia. How can we turn this around in order to work for us? And then I went to look at all of the different zoos all over China. And as you can imagine, Ben, some of them were not very nice. They're horrible. Then, and I approached the client again and said, okay, let's do your zoo, but let's do it this way. So that the vast majority, 90% of the land that you've given me, is we can release ungulates, hoofed animals. No, the key is that there's no carnivores. And they liked it. Said, okay, that's great. Let's do it. And then all the different hotel companies came aboard. And they said, yeah, that's a great idea. Let's do it. And we're building now these hotels that are all single loaded corridor. They all look out to the open land, the rooms that have sleeping porches so that you can be outside all night and be able to hear the animals as they roam. Because it's a white piece of property, but we put salt licks and water holes closer to the hotels, closer to the periphery of the project. My intentions are very selfish in that what I want to do with this project is to be able to educate, and this project has the ability to do tens of millions of Chinese per year, that perhaps wildlife is not something that should be on your dinner plate. And since then, I've met with hundreds of communist officials of the Communist Party of Southern China. And they have agreed wholeheartedly, and they've changed the laws as of 4 months ago, that wildlife is no longer has a place on the dinner tables of China. So it's not because of what I'm doing, but because of COVID, certainly. So there's a movement within China now to begin to understand Mother Earth better. And certainly, World Wild, our project, is going to be very popular in the future.
There's something really interesting about changing the opinion of 10 million people per year through the experience of actually going somewhere and falling in love with it. And it'll be the wealthier crowd, which is often the ones that are responsible for ordering these products in the first place. You're hitting this magical target demographic that needs to hear the message. I'm wondering, what is your creative process? Like, how do these really random pieces of the puzzle all fit together in your head to come up with these wonderful, amazing ideas that just all somehow seem to work? Because on paper, and I think for anyone who should take the time to go and check out your website and look at the kinds of works that you do, like, how does it just seem so fantastical and surreal and magical? How does it all come together? Can you break down the process for us?
You're very kind, Ben. I don't know. I really don't know how it all comes together. A client comes to us, and I always ask them, what's your dream? So I spend many months sometimes researching where they're from, or the town, the city, the place that they're from, the artwork that has been created there, or the wild animals that are from there. So I guess in essence, that is curiosity, that I'm constantly curious and want to help other people as much as we possibly can, in a nutshell.
No, curiosity is a great answer. And when I've met you, every single time, there's this aura of curiosity and wonder that follows you around in the way you interact with the world, the way you see the world, and everything that you do. Is there something that you do in your personal life to protect that wonder and curiosity? How do you think that's something that one can nurture inside of their own life?
The last 2.5, 3 years, I've taken up something very new. I'm painting. On Saturday, I painted from 7 o'clock to 7 o'clock at night. Painting. I'm obsessed with painting now. And it's painting about dreams. It's a painting about environmentalism. I'm going to have a show, perhaps at the new Four Seasons when it opens, when COVID's done. And all the paintings are going to be that if anyone's crazy enough to buy my paintings, all the money would go towards Wildlife Alliance and protection of wildlife in Cambodia. That's my real dream. But that's a great outlet for me now. And when I go to bed at night, I think about what I'm going to paint in the morning. And then I paint for 2 hours, 3 hours in the morning. And then I go to the studio. And then we have a series of probably 10 major projects now in the studio.
What do you think it is about painting that helps you protect your creativity or curiosity or wonder? Is it because it makes you see the world differently? Is it something about the creative process? Is it something about colors or structure or dreams? Like, what is it about painting that helps you?
It's about daydreaming. When I'm painting, it's about uninterrupted time. I shut off I don't go anywhere with the computer. I listen to stories. It's about uninterrupted time that allows me to think and daydream. So it's like a meditation, if you will, and a very long meditation. At the same time, it's also a great challenge. It's a huge challenge. I picked up painting at the age of 59, because I want to be able to have a big show and not to make a fool out of myself. So it's both challenging, but it's also meditation, and it's also a great outlet of creativity. You can paint whatever you want. And I'm finding that now on year 3, I'm finding that the ability to paint what I want is becoming easier after thousands and thousands of drawings that I've done. It's becoming much more gratifying than it was at the beginning. So yeah, like that.
During COVID, for me, it's also been an interesting process because I have to figure out what I can do from my home. A lot of the stuff that I did with travel and extravagant collaborations aren't really possible.
Right.
And I've had to reinvent what it means to create independently, individually, and learning a new skill and starting from zero when you have accomplishments in other sectors is something that I think is really difficult. I think there's something to be said about you picking up this new thing and giving yourself the space and time to start over from scratch in something. So kudos to you. I want to rewind a little bit for my listeners here. How does one go to actually create big, massive luxury resorts? Do you think you could walk us through your journey on how you ended up creating luxury hotels for people?
On graduation day at Harvard University in 1984, I asked Bunag, he's a Thai architect, my classmate. I asked him, "Where are you going?" And he says, "I'm going to Singapore." I said, "Singapore? Where the hell is that?" And he said, "Well, it's underneath China somewhere." And I said, "Oh, yeah, okay, can I come?" And he said, "Sure, yeah, why not?" And 4 months later, after backpacking through Europe, I ended up on his doorstep, $17 in my pocket. And he invited me into his place with he and Louisa, his wife. And I stayed there for a couple of days. And the next day I went and got a job at Bell Collins, which is an American landscape architecture company. The following week, I was on a plane down to Bali. I was sitting in Singapore. The following week, I was on the plane down to Bali, and I was working on the Bali Hyatt. Just like that, bang. And after that, everything else is history. I just worked my butt off learning landscape architecture for big hotels. And I became very much a Baliophile and learned the Balinese language, learned the Indonesian language. I could speak that fairly well. And I learned, most importantly, the architectural language of Indonesia. Then in 1989, I moved to Thailand. And there learned Thai language and, of course, the architectural language of Thailand. And I was still working for big hotels. And the owner of Dusatani, Chanin Donovanik, he asked me to leave Bell Collins and to start to work for him, which I did. And he floated me a loan of about $20,000. And I started my own company with that money. And since then, everything's been terrific, and just get one job after another, because my philosophy is in Indonesian, lebih gila lebih baik, which means the crazier the better. So no matter what I do, I look at what's the strangest answer to this question. If it's a design question, what's the strangest answer to this? How can I make my client happy but still give him something that perhaps no one else has thought about? So this is when I was still doing landscape architecture. And I did a lot of landscape architecture for big hotels, lots and lots. One time there were 7, 8 hotels going up in Jakarta alone, 8 5-star hotels, and I was doing 7 of them. Then I got to a point in the early 90s where I was tired of doing landscape architecture, just gardens for hotels and architecture that I didn't particularly like. So I decided to hire some architects and to collaborate. And certainly my good friend Lek Bunag was my greatest teacher ever. he taught me a lot about architecture and about resort architecture. So I started to do that myself. And then in the late 90s, I said, let's not just do architecture, but let's do interiors as well. And my company grew and swelled into being architecture, interiors, landscape, fine arts, artists, lighting designers, etc., graphic designers. And so that we could create from one office, and this was really the first time it was ever done, certainly in Asia, a truly multidisciplinary office that did all sorts of things. But because I wanted to create my own stories, if you will, my own real stories that were seamless. So that in a nutshell is how we got started.
It sounds like you basically just built your own playground from scratch. You're like, oh, I want to play with lighting. Oh, I'm just going to build a lighting department. Oh, I want to play with art. I'm going to build an art department.
Exactly.
And now I want to play with the environment. And now you're building a whole environmental thing. So with your current direction these days of fusing environmental sustainable practices with the luxury hotel industry, where do you see all of this going in 10, 20 years? What magnificent projects do you envision will be taking place that transcend what you're currently doing? Do you have an idea? Do you think about things that far ahead?
No, I don't. I'm very short-sighted. But I would love to be able to, expand what we're doing in Cambodia, because that's my real love. They're our neighbors here in Thailand. I've been living in Thailand now for 37 years, but Cambodia is our neighbor, and they are much more in need of assistance than anybody here in Thailand. So I'd love to see more of the national parks adopted and protected, because it's unfortunate they are disappearing every single day, and the wildlife is disappearing at a great rate. It's horrible, the great rate at which it's disappearing. And in another 10 years, as you say, Ben, not much is going to be left. The forests of Vietnam, the forests of Laos, they are virtually dead at this point. So if there's anyone out there that can help in any way, and as David Attenborough champions, the ability to save today's wildlife, what's left of it, and to rewild the world is an essential part of how we're going to save ourselves on this planet. So if there's anyone out there that can help with that, I'm all ears.
I love that. And so then on that same note, if you had a microphone to the world and wanted to invite your peers and maybe, frankly, anyone, what would you invite them to think about differently in the way they approach the next 10 years?
That we all have to understand that our world has edges. It's not a limitless world, and that what you do, whether it's a car that's fueled by gasoline, what you do is, or whatever, it has an impact. And to look very carefully at everything that you do during your daily life, and to make decisions about, even if it's the smallest decision, even where you're going to go on vacation, to make a conscious choice about how to help the environment, how to help the health of Mother Nature, how to help the health of the world.
All right. Thank you so much for your time, Bill. Thank you for your whimsy, your curiosity, your explorations, and the creativity that you bring. And I can't wait to see more of what you do, both digitally and hopefully one day in person.
Great. It's been fantastic speaking with you, Ben. It's always a pleasure to work with you, and I can't wait to work on the next project with you.
Alrighty, friends, that was the one and only Bill Bensley, and you can follow him on Instagram at Bill Bensley. The link in his bio at this very moment happens to be that white paper that I mentioned. And so you guys can dive into that and also just check out the amazing architecture and wonderful stories that he shares on his page. If you happen to be on lockdown in Thailand, Cambodia, Malaysia, or Vietnam, or any one of the places that he may have designed a magnificent hotel, definitely go check it out. It's super impressive to go and see one of these works of art in person. Otherwise, you can always go to bensley.com and look at some of his most outlandish projects, Shinta Mani Wild being my personal favorite. As always, you can find a summary at impacteverywhere.org of this, along with graphics and quotes of the favorite instances of this entire podcast. And if you like what you're seeing, feel free to send us some feedback at hi@impacteverywhere.org or leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. Next week, we have an expert in management consultant coming to speak with us. And I know it may sound a little bit weird because what is impact in management consultant look like? And we'll dive into all that and more with John Hagel, who was the director for the Center of the Edge at Deloitte for almost a decade. He has a lot of really interesting frameworks and ideas around how one might find their passion, so make sure to tune in if that sounds interesting. And stay positive because impact is everywhere.